So, I know this isn't going to come as a surprise to you because I'm a science teacher, but I love scientists. And one of the reasons that I love scientists is because they rely on evidence to make their decisions, right? And that's what these whole series of notes and videos have all been about, is what is the evidence that scientists have to support their argument that evolution by natural selection has been happening over millions of years. That's, I think, really important. I've got this neat t-shirt that says more science, less fiction. Let's make decisions based on evidence rather than our opinions or our feelings. That's something that I think is really cool about scientists. Well, scientists have been collecting all of this evidence of life on Earth for years and years and years. We've got fossils galore that we've collected over time. We've got observations of individual organisms that we've made over time. Scientists have been documenting the plants and the animals that we see on Earth and trying to understand how those plants and animals function and survive for, as long as there's been science. And so our fossil record literally has millions and millions of fossils inside of it. Not only that, but we've got pictures and images and graphics and collections of animals and plants that have been collected for hundreds of years. So there isn't a lack of evidence of what living organisms have looked like over time. We've got tons of evidence. And as a result, scientists have worked really hard to organize and codify that information. And that's something that I just think is great. That's a scientist in action. When a scientist has millions of pieces of evidence, they're going to try to sort it and organize it and categorize it so that they can understand it better and so that they can communicate it better. So what they've been doing is taking all of this evidence, all of these fossils and samples, and they've been organizing them, breaking them into groups and categories by age, but also breaking them into groups and categories by which organisms share similar characteristics and which don't. And the whole purpose of that organizing and codifying, this classification of living creatures, is to try to create what scientists call evolutionary trees. And think of a family tree, right? There's your grandparents and then your parents and then there's you. Someday there'll be your children underneath that, right? And you can look back through each of those stages of the family tree to see how the family has changed through time. Well, scientists are trying to do that with organisms too, trying to see what's related to each other and how are they related and how closely related are they. You're very closely related to your mom and to your dad, but you're not very closely related to your great-great uncle, right? So that's what scientists are trying to do by organizing and codifying all of the organisms that we've ever studied on Earth. Now, I think you can imagine that that's a pretty daunting task. If we've got millions of fossils and millions of samples, trying to organize them and group them and categorize them is a daunting task. We call that task taxonomy. Anytime we're trying to classify living things, we call it taxonomy. And we even will go as far as to look at embryos. We talked about that earlier in one of our earlier sections. We'll even look at embryos to discover relationships between species that may not be obvious on the outside. The sample in an earlier video was that both human embryos and fish embryos have gill slits. Now, that wouldn't be obvious if you were studying a mature fish and a mature human. Can you guess which one doesn't have gills anymore? So as we organize and codify things, we're not just looking at the external structures, but sometimes we're looking at the development of the embryo too, in order to find relationships. So again, that's a daunting task that scientists have to work through, and to make it more manageable, they've broken the organizational system, the categories, into this hierarchy of biological classification. And what happens is that an animal can be placed in an individual species. That is the most unique element of the biological classification system. But that same species isn't just in its own category. there are a group of animals that are kind of related, like your mom's and your dad's, to the species that you're studying. We call that the genus. And then there are an even wider group of animals that share some similarities. Think like your uncles and your aunts. We call that the family. And then there are an even wider group of animals that share some characteristics. Think like all of the people of your own particular race or your own particular culture. Okay, they share some similarities with you, even though they're maybe not anything like your family, right? So what happens is that each living organism can be dropped into each of these categories. And the farther that you get away from the species, the fewer similarities they share. And the closer that you get to the individual species, the more similarities that they share. Now, this seems a little bit vague just as it is, but let me show you a very specific example. So, this is the evolutionary family tree of the common water snake. And if you look down here, that's what it is. There's only one thing that fits into the species. The species is a very specific creature. One specific creature. But as you get further away, when you look at the genus, there's a couple of snakes that are similar to each other. So they are the closest related of this particular evolutionary family tree. The further you go away, you'll see the more and more connections that there are. In fact, let's do it in reverse. Take a look at this particular layer of the evolutionary family tree. You'll see it involves lots of kinds of snakes. There's some turtles up there. I see insects. There's even plants in that particular section, right? I see birds. Now go down a level to kingdom. What's missing now? What got removed? By the way, there's a hint over here. This kingdom is called Animalia. What do you think got removed from this particular layer? Right. All of the plants are now gone, aren't they? So this is just animals. And guess what? The common water snake is in that particular kingdom. It is an animal. But so is a bird. This looks like a pelican to me. So is a pelican. I think you and I can both agree that there's not a whole lot of relationships between a snake and a pelican. It ain't like they're cousins. But they are both animals. That's why they fit in this category together. Let's jump down another level to phylum. Can you see what's missing now in the phylum category? Right? What did we lose when we went from Animalia down to phylum? Did you spot it yet? Yeah, the insects are gone, aren't they? So you've got a little, I guess, what is that, a grasshopper? Okay, there's no grasshoppers down here. So what's happening is we're getting more and more specific as we get closer to the actual species that we're trying to categorize. Okay, so this common water snake, you can see he's in every single one of these layers. And what you're seeing as you go from layer to layer is more and more specificness in the creatures that are related to the common water snake. We're getting closer to him in the family tree, right? Let's do one more together. Let's go from the phylum level down to the class level. What do we lose there? Okay. By the way, there's a hint over here. The common water snake is in the class Reptilia. Does that give you a hint at all? Yeah. Anything that wasn't a reptile is now gone, right? Everything here are just reptiles. So the bird, he's gone. The ox, he's gone. The tuna, gone. Okay, so what scientists do is they literally categorize each individual species into a genus, a family, a suborder, an order, a class, a phylum, a kingdom, and a domain. And how do they decide which of those categories to put the common water snake into? Well, they put it into categories based on what does it share characteristics with? What does it share embryonic development with? What does it share physical characteristics with, or skeletal characteristics? And what that does is it allows scientists to go back over time and find relationships between animals, to discover relationships between animals that they may not have ever discovered before. It's cool, right? It's a complex process, but it provides you with a lot of very specific evidence. Now, what I think is crazy is we could create one of these charts for every single living organism on Earth. The other thing that's crazy is these charts don't always stay the same. What do you think might cause one of these evolutionary family trees to change? All right, have a good time thinking about that. I'll talk to you again in a minute or two.